Okay, our speaker now was born on Maui in Ulupalakua down the road here. He's a graduate of Maui High School. He graduated from the University of Hawaii at Manoa in political science, has both his BA and his MA from there. He's the director of Native Hawaiian Student Services and is a lecturer at UH Manoa in ethnic studies. Ladies and gentlemen, may I introduce to you Dr. Willie Kauai.
Aloha mai kako. It's an honor to be here, to be home amongst family, friends. It's a beautiful day today. It's a great occasion. I want to say mahalo nui to the event organizers, particularly Ku'uipo and Wayne for making this happen. It's definitely an important holiday, a time to remember, and this is definitely part of how we recover our memory. Like Wayne had mentioned, I'm originally from the island of Maui. I was born in and raised in Ulupalakua. So this place, this aina, is very familiar to me. My father was the foreman there for a very long time, Andrew Kauai Sr. And so I've traveled this road many of times. I'm the first of my family to have earned a college degree on my father's side. Like Wayne had mentioned, I finished a PhD in political science in 2014. My research looked at the evolution of citizenship laws in the Hawaiian Kingdom. A history very much like La'kuokoa that many of us never learned while we were being educated in Hawaii's public school system. In fact, it was a school system, I think, that systematically denied a particular kind of history, a history that is not just important for historical reasons, but a history that has, I think, severe implications for today, a history that offers our people power, a history that offers our people, our lahui, empowerment, which is very important. I'm also the director of Native Hawaiian Student Services at UH Manoa. That basically means that our unit is responsible for providing academic and financial services to the approximately 2,800 Native Hawaiians that attend UH Manoa. These, percentage-wise, statistically, there have never been this much Native Hawaiians at the University of Hawaii, and not just amongst the student rank as well too. What you see at the University of Hawaii Manoa is also a burgeoning group of Hawaiian faculty that are now there. When I had started at the university in 2006, there were less than 1% Native Hawaiian faculty at UH Manoa. And this is an important, I think, piece to note, because La'kuokoa and our memory of it, and recovering our memory of it, a lot of that happens because Hawaiians start to access the university. A lot of the research that we see around this particular event comes out of the university. While I was there doing a PhD, I was also surrounded by a number of other colleagues. Dr. Keanu Sai was also doing his PhD. Dr. Kuhil Vogler, Kamana Beamer, Sydney Aokea, Kalavai Amor, Iokepa Salazar, and it was through this research, through this dissertation, that many of these important stories and events, such as La'kuokoa, becomes contextualized. So I'll share a little bit about that history and why I think it's important for today. So La'kuokoa, like many of us know today, signifies Hawaii's independence. It marks Hawaii's becoming a member of the international community. Important to note that the Hawaiian Kingdom is the first non-European nation, the first non-white country in the world to be recognized as an independent and sovereign state. And of course, again, that is not a history that many of us in this audience had access to. Right? Most of us in this audience, like myself, went to public school. And when I was there, from 1985 to 1998, from Kula School to Kalama School to Maui High, we had 3 full semesters of Hawaiian history. One in 4th grade, 1 semester in 4th grade, 1 semester in 7th grade, and 1 semester in 9th grade. And so, of course, 3 semesters is not enough for us to have learned how rich and empowering this history was. And especially a date like La Ku'okoa. That particular date, however, like I had mentioned, Hawaii is the first non-European nation in the world, first non-white. If you consider how brilliant that was, in 1843, sorry, even before that, 1842, the actual envoys that go out for about a 2.5 year journey around the world. They start that journey in 1842. Actually, La Ku'okoa isn't celebrated in Hawaii until 1844. That's how long it takes for the ship to get back to Hawaii, almost 6 months. But I think why it's so important, especially considering that time, reveals the brilliance of the king, reveals the brilliance of the government. Mind you that throughout the Pacific, there was gunboats. The French were in the Pacific. The Americans were in the Pacific. The British were in the Pacific. This rise of European imperialism was here. Becoming independent was a way to survive. It was a way to survive amidst the rise of European imperialism in the 19th century. Kauai looked to what was happening in Aotearoa. The British were colonizing Aotearoa. 1840, you have the Treaty of Waitangi. Kauai looked off into the south again to our cousins in Tahiti. The French colonizing Tahiti. This quest to become independent allowed survival to Hawaii. Hawaii is also the first Polynesian country in the world to be recognized. And knowing that many relations were formed between Kauai and other Pacific Island nations around the world, also trying to help them to become independent, to become autonomous. When you look into Hawaii's history, 1843, November 28th, 50 years in which we celebrate this history. It's because of La Ku'okoa that our country was able to evolve. Hawaii's constitutional system in 1840, one of a kind. Hawaii has a Declaration of Rights in 1839. Its first constitution in 1840, a constitutional amendment in 1852, another constitutional amendment in 1864. All of the public infrastructure that you see around us today, even within the state of Hawaii's appropriation of it, the Department of Education, the Fire Department, the Police Department, all of Queens Hospital, the whole entire public healthcare system, these are not American inventions. These were created in the 19th century. Right? And when you look at it through an institutional view, you have a very progressive country that's forming, even amid European imperialism, even amid various gunboats and threats that were in Hawaii's waters. My particular research at the University of Hawaii looked at the evolution of citizenship laws in Hawaii, evolution of citizenship laws throughout the 19th century. And again, a very interesting history that many of us never received. Citizenship in Hawaii, again, very progressive. Hawaiian Kingdom is passing racially inclusive citizenship laws and rights in 1845, right? And when you see where the worst of the world was, in particular, if you look at the United States and where they were just on the topic of citizenship, they were way, way behind, right? Since the very inception of the U.S. Constitution, almost until the middle of the 20th century, up to 1950, in order to have access to rights, voting rights in particular, you had to satisfy one major prerequisite in the United States. And that prerequisite was that you had to be white, right? The Hawaiian Kingdom, in contrast, however, is passing citizenship laws that are racially inclusive. This is 20 years before the 14th Amendment is even written into the U.S. Constitution. This is about 20 years before the American Civil War happens, right? And I think when you start to look at the composition of the Hawaiian citizenry in the 19th century, very multi-ethnic. You had people from all corners of the world finding their way to the shores of Hawaii, many of them naturalizing and being afforded all the rights therein. I think one important story to tell in this history of citizenship is even former slaves from the American South, escaping the grips of their slave masters, finding their way to the shores of Hawaii, utilizing Hawaiian Kingdom law, specifically Hawaiian citizenship laws, to access rights. Anthony Allen is considered one of the first black men to have come to Hawaii. Anthony Allen utilizes Hawaiian Kingdom law, citizenship laws in particular, and naturalizes. Now, if you think about that particular political system in which he came from, one that's built upon a legacy and a foundation of white supremacy, Anthony Allen was introduced to a whole other society. A former slave becomes actually a resort owner in Waikiki. You had other examples such as Betsy Stockton. Betsy Stockton is considered one of the first black women to find her way to Hawaii. Again, former slave owner. She doesn't naturalize. However, regardless of that, she experiences social mobility. She experiences rights and protections like she didn't in the United States. Betsy Stockton ends up opening the Stockton Institute, which later becomes Lahaina Luna. This is not a history, again, that many of us knew. And again, that's just citizenship. Even when you push forward in some of the more critical moments of Hawaii's history, namely the Bayonet Constitution in 1887, the overthrow in 1893, the illegal and forced annexation of 1898, Aboriginal population stepped up to the plate to defend their country. But standing shoulder to shoulder was also the multi-ethnic citizenry that comprised the Hawaiian national citizenry. You had Chinese that were fighting for the country called Hawaii. You had Japanese fighting for the country called Hawaii, side by side with their Aboriginal statesmen. This is an important history also to realize for purposes of today, which I'll talk about in a second. But you literally had this multi-ethnic national citizenry defending their country. The looming prospect, the idea of the United States annexing Hawaii, wasn't just a threat to the Aboriginal population. Even the Chinese looking into that possibility are also looking at the anti-Asian laws that the United States had created, such as the Asian Exclusion Act, 1882. Right? So even the Chinese had an investment, a stake in this country called the Hawaiian Kingdom. And many of them stood shoulder to shoulder. Even when Robert Wilcox is storming the palace in, I believe, 1895, to try and restore Queen Liliuokalani, many Chinese are also holding weapons with him as well. And when you look at the reason, when you ask that question, why was the Hawaiian Kingdom so progressive? Why did the Hawaiian Kingdom offer other people of color rights and protections? I think that question could be answered because the majority of the Hawaiian legislature, the majority of those creating laws in the Legislative Assembly were also people of color, was also the Aboriginal population, who didn't see race as a prerequisite to citizenship, who didn't see race as a way to prevent others from the same protections and privileges and rights therein. Now, so when we talk about Lakuoko'a, I think it's important to also remember how much people fought for that. When we talk about Lakuoko'a, it's important to remember the multi-ethnic population. It's important to remember the Aboriginal population, their commitments, what they offered. And it's important to remember that because Lakuoko'a, Hawaiian Independence Day, gives us the bulletproof legal argument that Hawaii has today. Right? My friend Keahi over here is wearing a shirt. The Hawaiian Kingdom still exists. Yeah. It exists because of what happened in 1843. It exists because the commitment that the national population had in building a country. And mind you, we are building this progressive country, not just amid European imperialism in the Pacific. We're building this progressive country while many of our people are dying, right? With the coming of disease, that is also happening, right? With the coming of disease, we go from a population from 600,000, some say 800,000, some say 1 million, within a century, to almost 40,000, right? That's massive death everywhere, right? In 1890, I can provide a picture for you, a graphic. In 1890, we couldn't even fill up Aloha Stadium. 1890, we couldn't fill up Aloha Stadium. Aloha Stadium seats 50,000. There was 40,000 Hawaiians in 1890, right? But despite the death, despite the sickness, look at the country that was built, right? Even amid all this sickness, what do? We build Queen's Hospital. What do? We build Kapi'olani Hospital, right? And even that healthcare system that we know of today, that at the time in the 19th century was also very progressive. In the Hawaiian Kingdom, you had healthcare at no cost. You had universal healthcare, right? Which in the context of today, and in contrast today, the Aboriginal population is at the bottom of the barrel of every social economic indicator that we have. How is it that we go from being the most literate, right? Being the most literate, building all of these institutions. How do we go from being the most literate to the most illiterate in the course of a century? Yeah. Now today, the Hawaiian population, you name it, we are the most incarcerated, we are the most illiterate, We're the most unhealthy. And what is the correlation to these statistics? There's a lot of factors, but one big one is we lost control of our government. Somebody else started to run the government. Somebody else started to take over those institutions. Right? When you ask the question, how is it that 13 or whatever, 30 people in 1893 take over the government? How did they do that? Well, of course, with the backing of the United States Marines, the backing of an illegal U.S. diplomat. But essentially, what did they do? They changed administrators. They changed administrators. Instead of having a Hawaiian running the Department of Education, instead of having a Hawaiian running the fire department, instead of having a Hawaiian running Queen's Healthcare, instead of a Hawaiian running the judiciary, instead of Hawaiians filling the legislative assembly, they changed administrators. Yeah. The territorial era after Hawaii is illegally annexed is brutal. Yeah. It's brutal. And that corresponds, again, with the loss of our government. So, like I had mentioned, a lot of this information, a lot of this history happens because Hawaiians have access to education, because we are at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, right? But I also want to say that it's not just important for us to recover our political and legal history, right? It's also important for us to recover how we survived in these islands. How we survived in these islands without relying upon the Matson container. Yeah. We did that for 2,000 years in one of the most isolated places in the world. 2,000 years. Not only did we survive, but we thrived. Look at the advent of the fish ponds. Look at the advent of the lo'i. Look at the advent of our dry land agricultural systems. Highly sophisticated. Right? The reason why we thrived in this place is because we learned how to use it in unison. Yeah. I am happy to say that today at the University of Hawaii, there are about 135 Native Hawaiians in PhD programs. Yeah. There are 135 Native Hawaiians in PhD programs. And then you think about that for a second. That's powerful. That's powerful because that means, right, in a lot of cases, what we're also seeing is that Hawaiians are starting to earn PhDs in the STEM fields, in the sciences, right? They're starting to recover our history, our love, our knowing of science. In order to survive in one of the most isolated places in the world, you have to know science. You have to know observation. And so it is exciting to know that we have Hawaiians in physics who are doing PhDs in physics, Hawaiians that are doing PhDs in chemistry, Hawaiians that are doing PhDs in botany, in soil science, right? Because not only are they learning the academics of that particular discipline, but they're also integrating Aboriginal knowledge systems that allowed us to survive here for so long. So beyond just recovering our political history, it's exciting to know that we're also recovering this history of surviving and thriving, particularly through science. Kuipo, how much? Okay. So I think it's also important to note that this is not the only Laku Okoa celebration that we have, and this is happening throughout Hawaii, right? And that's also powerful because there's so much tied to this day, right? The idea that the Hawaiian Kingdom still exists is empowering, but more than anything, what it also does is it also creates more questions, right? Many of us, in fact, all of us, all lived and were raised and born in U.S. occupied Hawaii. Yeah. Many of us, none of us, got to experience Hawaii in the 19th century. Hawaii without U.S. occupation. So, drawing back to education, right? Questions of whether or not we can survive without U.S. dependency, right? How would we feed ourselves if the Matson container stopped coming? Yeah. Many of us who definitely were born and raised up country know how to do that. Have access to aina, have access to water. Unfortunately, in the particular city that I live in Honolulu, that's not the case. Yeah, that's not the case. They say that there's 4 to 5 days worth of food on the shelves. Right? And if you look at the kind of support and aid that places such as New Orleans or Puerto Rico encountered after suffering heavy devastations, in many ways, that's our fate, perhaps, and something that we should be ready for. Because beyond just this political history, beyond just the political and legal implications today, we have to remember how to feed ourselves. We have to remember how to survive. And I think when you see what's happening in Hawaiian education, when you see the rise of immersion schools, the importance of Hawaiian language, the revitalization of Hawaiian language, the rise of charter schools, that gives us hope. Yeah. That kind of schooling, that kind of education has to be the future. I'm also happy to see that the Department of Educations and larger institutions such as Kamehameha schools are also starting to make that pivot, right, in teaching us how to survive. Because that brain power, right, that brain power that allowed us to survive in the most isolated place in the world, that brain power still exists. They exist, however, in rural pockets, right? In rural pockets such as Ulupalakua, such as Hana, such as Keanai, right? What's maybe needed today is captivating that brain power, that magic that still exists, and giving it a voice, right? And just talking to Uncle over there, making upena. That's the kind of brain power that still exists, and is definitely vital for us to persist in these islands. When we start having a much broader influence in our education system, in particular higher education, we're going to start to see the transformational changes that we need. When we start to raise the number of Native Hawaiians accessing higher education, going to college, earning college degrees, we're going to start to see the important transformation that we need. It's also exciting to see that we have Hawaiian faculty at Maui College, such as Kahele Duklo, Kalekua Ka'eo, a Hawaiian chancellor, as well. Uh, Very important for us to start to break that administrative ceiling that has prevented us from taking leadership positions, especially within education. The way to a healthy Hawaii is through education. The way to a healthy Hawaiian population is through education. And so with that said, I want to again thank all the organizers for putting on such a important day, for allowing us to remember what it took for Laku'oko'a, what Hawaiian independence offered, for allowing us to remember the country that was built, also for allowing us to remember the country that was hijacked and currently still is, and for allowing us to remember the tremendous kuleana that all of us have in moving Hawaii forward. So, mahalo nui. Thank you for having me, and have a beautiful day.
Willie, thank you very much. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
I hope you're seeing that there's a common thread out today, and that is research and education. And I was doing some research on my book on Hawaiians in the American Civil War, and people came up to me and said, there were no Hawaiians in the American Civil War. Well, we now know there was about 132 Hawaiians that served in the Civil War that gave to the United States. And although that was hidden for a long time, we found the Kealoha grave in the white graveyard up in Punch Bowl, and now the Hawaiians have their own separate grave site for those who served in the American Civil War. So that's another example of what a little bit of research will do, and some education. What we're going to do, I just want to remind everyone, make sure that you get up with Keaumoku over there on the Kuleana land rights information, and also for the Ku'e petition, to make sure you sign that if you haven't done it before.